Today is Tuesday, October 25th. My name is Teju, and I do sincerely wish and extend a heartfelt hope that all of you, our dear friends, enjoy the perfect day. I would like to also say that the opinions and ideas expressed by me are not the opinions, ideas of the radio station 101.3 WKJJ WPJQ, not necessarily the opinions and ideas of the staff, the ownership, which is you, the community, the hosts, the guests, or the operators of this radio station. I alone am to be held accountable for everything that I say. So I got a brother here today who I consider one of the sharpest minds in America today, living right here in Milwaukee. And I do believe this, and I say to him without trying to pump him sunshine, that what he has done is written a book which I think is one of the most important books for people of African descent in America to read. I say that because you cannot read this book. I'll bet you all the money in my pocket right now, which ain't a whole lot, but still, the principle of bet is this. You cannot read this book and not come out with a changed mind, a mind that is healthier than it was before you read this book. Now, I challenge you to read this book and not do that. And I'm not going to say too much about the book. I'm going to introduce you to the author of the book, okay? And the author of the book is none other than Mr. LaRue Ned, and he's sitting here with me right now. Good morning, LaRue.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, man, and thanks for coming. What's the name of your book?
Oh, Why We Shouldn't Call Our Ancestors Slaves.
Okay.
How that happened was I was working for a community newspaper. I was writing a column about slavery. And so I wanted to get a good definition of the word slave so I could use in my column. Mm-hmm. And so when I looked up the definition of the word slave, that's when it dawned on me that this definition does not fit. I went to the public library, found a dictionary that was over 100 years old, looked it up. Then I came up, and at that time, it was in the 90s, no, it was the 90s. Anyway, at that time, I looked up a current dictionary, and the definition was almost identical. Mm-hmm. Now, since I published that little pamphlet, then the book, then this the third edition, I go to dictionaries now and look up the word, and I see that the definition is changing. So, and it kind of makes me want to rethink, well, should we still continue to call our ancestors slaves? Now, but the fact that the definition does not fit is not the only reason that we should not call our ancestors slaves. There are other reasons. We'll get into those. But one of the one that got me started was that the definition did not fit. Mm-hmm. And now what the lexicologists are trying to do is get the definition to fit. Because one of the things in my exploration of this understanding the word slave, which is different from slavery, is that the word slave is also a bogus word. And even the people who made up the word slave knew that. Because by definition, a slave is one who has been divested of all his personal freedoms, his personal rights, liberty, totally under the control of another one, etc., etc. And so, in the Declaration of Independence, the people who came up with the word slave wrote the Declaration of Independence, and they said that we were endowed with certain unalienable rights. So the rights that a slave was supposed to have lost, according to the definition, are unalienable rights. So that makes the word slave even a bogus word right from the jump. And so now what they're trying to do is they're trying to adjust it, and I believe to get us to accept this idea that of us, our ancestors being slaves. And by doing so, we still in the back of our minds, we know that there's nothing good about being a slave to anything, or especially to anyone.
With Brother LaRue Ned, who wrote why we shouldn't call our ancestors slaves. I think everybody ought to, if everybody of African descent in America read this book, there'd be a paradigm shift like nobody ever saw. And we're going to tell you before the program is over how you can get your hands on the book. And maybe even we'll just award somebody a copy. Right before we go to this flash break, let me just say this. You can call in if you want to, 888-5025. If that's hard to remember, think 888 $half quarter and call us up and you can talk with us here on 101.3 WKJJ WPJQ. Be right black with you.
Went unchanged, virtually almost unchanged for over 100 years. And now the reason that I believe that it's starting to change is because maybe some kind of way they picked up on the fact that somebody's out here saying that this definition ain't right. It's a bogus word. And I was talking about the Declaration of Independence declaring that we have unalienable rights, which the definition of slave says those rights are taken away from a person. And so unalienable rights are rights that cannot be taken away.
Particularly when they're endowed by the Creator. They say God gave you these rights. Right?
Exactly. And so now think about that. Now I want to throw this in there while I'm thinking about it. We celebrating Juneteenth, and there's people out here right now talking about we want to make Juneteenth a national holiday. But think about the subliminal message of celebrating Juneteenth. Because in Juneteenth, we're saying they set us free. So if God, if they can take away our God-given rights, what does that make them to us?
Well, ooh, brother, that's deep. That makes him like better than God, right? Better than God, right?
Exactly.
Right, bro. That's a serious point, bro.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, so there's a lot of, in fact, there's a lot of subliminal things that happens on a subconscious level when we accept this word slave and we see ourselves as being descendants of slaves. Then and here I was saying that we will automatically and subconsciously transfer certain characteristics about slaves to ourselves if we believe that we are descendants of slaves.
And you know, they always talk about the shame of slavery, right? I mean, we even have people talking like, I know there's certain articles and speeches given by Frederick Douglass which talk about the shame of slavery, and the poets even up into the 20th century, the early 1900s through the 20th, through the 1920s, okay? Up into through the First World War and up to almost to the Depression, they talk about like erasing the shame of slavery. We have W.B. Du Bois talking about erasing the shame of slavery. We have many of the so-called like profound thinkers, Alain Locke and others, talking about, erasing the shame of slavery, when in fact there's no shame in what somebody does to you. The shame is on the person that does you wrong. But we're talking about erasing the shame of slavery, like as though we should be ashamed of ourselves for what somebody else did to us.
Well, okay, now what we want to do is we want to separate the word slavery from the word slave. Now, slavery is the system, and we were definitely in slavery. But what my point is that a person could be in slavery and not be a slave.
Good point.
You see what I'm saying? Okay, so there's no shame about us being in slavery. But there is shame in the fact if one becomes a slave. Okay. Because that means that now I'm bound down to you. We all have this, we know what the image of slave is. But y'all's a boss and I give in and what you want to do to me, boss. Is we sick?
Well, see, the thing about that too, I think we need to challenge every nuance of the word.
We should. And trust me, now here's what it is, that the word slave and the word slavery really didn't come out, wasn't even invented, it didn't even exist until the mid-1400s. And that's about the time when the Europeans started to go into Africa and take us out. And so along with the word slavery came the word slave, so they did kind of come into existence at the same time.
I'm going to interrupt you. And the reason I want to interrupt you is this. I want, because I read your book, right?
Uh-huh.
I want you to tell people the origin of that SLA. You got SCLA.
Slav, from Slav.
I want you to see. Please, and pardon me for interrupting your flow,
no problem.
but I definitely want you to.
Right.
Man, that like hit me like whoa. But explain that part.
Right. So what they're saying is that, and this is what confuses us too. And if they can get us to accept this idea by any means, then they will. But so we have to look close, and we can see the trickery in the game and in the language. So they're saying that the word slave evolved from the word Slav, and Slav is the name of a people that were captured in Germany, in Europe, and they were made to they were just taken over. They were made to work and do all this other kind of stuff. So that's SLAV. Okay, so when they came up with the word slave, they used that word to make a new word, but the definition did not transfer.
And what was the original definition of say a Slav?
The name of Slav meant, Slav, according to the Slavic people, meant noble people.
Okay,
that's what the word Slav meant.
So the word SLAV, because we know we've heard of like what Czechoslovakia and Slavia, and these are where the Slavic people live.
Okay,
but their word Slav, what was it
meant
again?
Noble people.
Noble people.
Noble people.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But when they I'm just following your
right. So the Germans, or the people who captured the Slavic people, they had disdain for Slavs. Mm-hmm. So they took a positive word, and to them it became negative. Mm-hmm. So that's when it was still Slav, though. Mm-hmm. So now, about the mid 1400s, they had to come up with a new word because it was a system that never had existed before in the history of mankind: slavery. So that's why they had to invent a new word to match a new situation. Mm-hmm. Slavery, the people say, well, the Egyptians were slaves, or these people way back then, the slavery is ancient. No, we've always had, there has always been systems of human captivity. But slavery was a very different system. And John Hope Franklin, I believe it is, that's when he wrote his book, The Peculiar Institution, pointing out that this system of slavery was like none ever done before. And so if we understand the processes of slavery, then we might understand that we're still in slavery.
We are actually, when you look at us here, sitting here in 2016, we qualify now to be more in the category of, quote, slave, unquote, than we did before the 13th Amendment.
Yes.
In
our
1860s.
actions are
and our mentality.
Right.
Our mentality.
Right. And our actions and our mentality more closely fit the definition of the word slave. But we've already said the word slave is a bogus word anyway. So we can say we come close to fitting that definition, but I still don't want to call us slaves.
Well, and I never would. I mean, I never would. But see, I say that to say, look, man, like everybody wants to look back and say, like, look at them slaves, look at them slaves, look at them slaves. And I say this, that look, the people under captivity and forced labor, being raped, maimed, murdered, and forced to work sun up to sundown, beaten and killed if they didn't, having their children killed if they showed any resistance, okay? Those people actually, if they were given, imagine what they would do if they were given some of the opportunities that are available today. And we have those opportunities because they, back at that point, said, we are not slaves. We're going to fight this until it's over, And so the unfortunate thing at this particular moment, we got to take a little break. 101.3, I'm sitting here with LaRue Ned, the author of the book, Why We Shouldn't Call Our Ancestors Slaves. And at any rate, you were talking before about the differences.
Yes, and what makes slavery a form of captivity that had not existed before. In prior forms of human captivity and servitude, the people that were captured always looked like the people that they were captured by. Their languages and their cultures were more similar than different. When the European came into Africa, that became the opposite. Our cultures and languages and way of seeing life were more different than alike. And so what happened was, first of all, is who was capturing who. Then the next thing is the process that we went through under slavery. No other people have ever gone through this process, not even the Native American. Nobody has. What the steps that we went through to get us here, no one else has gone through those steps. And one of the biggest and most devastating one, most people want to look at the physical pain and torture and taking the kids and all of that, you know, and the beating and the rapes and all that. That's what we focus on. And looking at that carnage and that horror causes a lot of us to turn our eyes and turn our minds away from looking at what happened to us during slavery. But the most devastating effect on us was removal of the African mind and replacing that with the European mind. And so now we think more like Europeans than we do Africans. Mm-hmm. And we're not even looking at trying to get our African mind back. Some of us aren't. Mm-hmm. Some of us are. So
let me get back on some of the points I want to discuss with you, because one of the things that your book does that other people's books don't do. Okay, I'm going to take a little quote from your book, and I want you to expand on that. Okay, on page 7 of the introduction, you say all black people, rich and poor, are in the same American boat. Calling our ancestors slaves affects the esteem of all black people, rich and poor, because it speaks about the quality of our nature by way of the people from whom we descended. Money does not heal these problems. In many cases, money may even make them worse because of what people must go through to get money. Money also gives people more power to act on the negative thoughts that possess them. Okay? And the belief that our ancestors were slaves was implanted in all of us at an early age, and because it relates to the people from whom we descended, it is impossible for this belief to not have an effect on all black African Americans. Hey, look here, let me tell you something, man. Again, this, I think, is one of the important books, one of the most important books that was ever written, okay, because we often see all these books talking about, you know, like slavery, 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 slavery. And even also, I mean, and I know we were talking about something else, but let me digress a little bit, man. I just want to digress. Okay. So you talk about like the psychological, the mental effects, you know, even thinking our ancestors are slaves and knowing that's where we came from.
There are people out here who are who we, by certain standards, you would call very successful. But yet, those people, self-esteem was never they never had a healthy self-esteem. And a classic example of that is Michael Jackson. Otherwise, why would he sell his soul and do his nose like that, and do his lips like that, and do his hair like that, and his skin? They say he had a skin disease.
Vitiligo, he did.
He could have made his skin darker as well as to made it lighter. You know what I'm saying? And even a lot of us, man. You know, I'm reminded of the Kenneth Clark doll experiments, where the kids they ask the little kids, well, which one is the good doll and the bad doll, and every time, almost every time. The kid would refer to the white doll as being the good doll and the doll they want to play with. Then when they ask the kid, well, which one is more like you, the kid hesitate because he don't want to point to the black doll. And I'm saying we still see those same kind of choices being made today.
Yeah, but go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you, but go ahead. You're talking about the first time, you know, your experience.
And so that kind of, so I'm saying, and I believe that that's true. It's got to be true from almost every American, black American, African American person. That's one of the first things we learn. You know what? This is I put this in the book too. That now it's getting to the point where we're not even learning anything. I was visiting my grandson and his sisters and brothers, and so I started asking them about what they learned in his school. So I'm like, but where do black people come from? Man, they thought. And we talking about kids in the 5th, 6th grade. They thought. And African American. That's where we come from.
Right. Yeah.
So man, I'm saying our kids, man, aren't being taught about anything about who they are, and that's why even to this day we're suffering from an identity crisis, and one of the reasons for that crisis is because we're taught in a negative way about our history and who we are and who we came from. And that goes back to the self-esteem issues. Mm-hmm. And so when you lose that, you lose everything. Mm-hmm. In the Bible, it says, what good does it do to gain the whole world and lose your soul? And losing your soul is your identity. It's it's who you are, your essence. Mm-hmm. To disconnect from that, and that was one of the main goals of slavery, was to disconnect us from that. Mm-hmm.
All right, we black with you, okay? And I kind of like ran through the break last time. I wasn't able to say, hey, we going to be black with you. We had to cut quick. But anyway, we are black with you with LaRue Ned, who's the author of Why We Shouldn't Call Our Ancestors Slaves. And before we went off the air, I was talking about how if we call ourselves slaves, instead of like connecting to Africa, then we're going to focus more on the American stuff or the slave stuff that we're doing. And when we look at trying to compare ourselves to America, it looks like all the stuff that we're doing is wrong. And I say we are not doing wrong America. We are just African people. And after living in Africa and seeing that we act like them, talk like them, walk like them, have the spiritual attitude as them, the music is the same, the food is the same, the attitude is the same, the relationships between men and women are the same. We are the same African people. Is the only thing that we're doing wrong is trying to live according to a culture that is foreign to us.
Exactly.
And that's really the difficulty of our problem. So
it's right. We have a predisposition for African culture as a people. It's in our nature, the way we look at things, and we can see it even in the way that we practice European culture. There's a part in here where I talk about, it's called cultural rejection. And during slavery, the African was taken out and the European was put in. But even though we still practice European culture in an African way, we're trying to put a square peg into a round hole, kind of like. And so, but what happened is, it was virtually a cultural transplant. Mm-hmm. And there's a phenomenon that takes place that can be compared to a physical transplant. So when there's a physical transplant, in order for the body to accept that foreign organ, you have to give it drugs to fool the body, or else the body will try to reject that organ as as being foreign to it. And so the same way with our culture and our spirit, that European culture is not working for us.
Man, that was a good analogy about like, okay, this culture or these ideas are like a transplant. When you get an organ transplant, but you need certain types of drugs to make sure that your body doesn't reject that foreign organ. And we have certain types of like little things we call like maybe social drugs or psychological drugs to make sure we don't reject, white American culture. With you, I'm here with LaRue Ned, the author of Why We Shouldn't Call Our Ancestors Slaves. Man, read that excerpt from your book, brother. Read that excerpt.
This is only the first time. Imagine how our children feel when they are bused into schools where they are the minority. Imagine them sitting in a classroom and being one of 2 or 3 black children out of 20 or more white children in the class. Then imagine how they feel when they begin to learn about American history. American history is full of examples of how Europeans came to America, conquered the land and the people, and overcame all other types of adversities. They give credit to their triumphs, to their spirit as a people. At the same time, our children are taught that the black African people were slaves to the Euro-American people. At that point, what could possibly be going through our children's minds?
And then we wonder, why our children aren't really
Exactly.
ain't loving school, because they're still teaching that
Exactly.
jive too. And if you don't teach it in school, they will fire you. I know, because I got fired for refusing to follow curriculum guidelines when I was teaching at MPS. But in your book, you talk about the 4 reasons that we should not call ourselves our ancestors slaves. There were 4 distinct reasons.
Right.
Well, ourselves too, or call ourselves. If we don't call our ancestors slaves, we will not call ourselves the descendants of slaves.
Exactly.
You know,
and therefore slaves.
There you go. So, because you got to be if you are a descendant of something, you have to be what you are a descendant of also. But yeah, give us the 4 reasons that you.
Now, reason 1, we pretty much went over that. The definition does not fit, and that it's a bogus word. Anyway, the story of the resistance, man, I talk about that and how our resistance forced them to come up with the Emancipation Proclamation. And then reason number 2 is the effect that it has on our self-esteem. On our mind and our self-esteem. So that sets up the idea of inferiority. And if you believe it, then, I mean, even if you're proud of yourself, in the back of your mind, you're still going to have the idea of inferiority because we are being descendants of slaves. When our self-esteem is damaged, how it leads to psychological or mental disorders and self-destructive behavior. The next reason, the third one, is what I call abandonment of form. And abandonment of form is what makes you what you are. Your form does. It's in your nature. It's in your DNA. It's in your history. I put in there the warnings against abandonment of form. And I use the allegory of the chicken and the duck. And even in the Bible, there are warnings against us.
Well, tell me about the chicken and the duck. No, what I mean, no, come on.
Okay.
Because I mean, you know, like...
Okay, let me say this. Okay, blasphemy, then I'm saying that calling our ancestors slaves is a form of blasphemy.
Okay.
And we need to understand that because blasphemy is when you speak negatively against something that you consider to be sacred. And or that should be sacred to you. And so that's just like somebody talks bad about the flag, or even if you go around here and you start talking bad about the Green Bay Packers, you're gonna catch some flack. Okay, now we're going back to the chicken and the duck.
Okay, all right.
Okay, the story is about the chicken who is a group of chickens actually, who were raised in a duck environment, and so after generations of ducks, the chickens start to think like ducks, act like ducks. Eventually, the chicken, when he looked in the mirror, he didn't see himself as being odd. He just thought he was a different kind of duck. And so he didn't think his thinking was odd because he saw the other chickens thinking like him. Okay. So eventually the time came when the ducks would go to the water and get in the water. So the chickens jumped in the water too. But the chickens' feathers aren't water resistant. So they start sinking. And the ducks is looking around wondering why the chickens ain't floating.
What's wrong with them chickens? What's wrong with them ducks? Right?
Chickens talk about, well, something must be wrong with us.
Yeah.
But they're not conforming. They're not acting according to their true nature. And so, and that's just one thing that's just one analogy that warns us
against. That's a good
analogy,
brother. That's
conforming to the. We're African people, but we're trying to live like European people. Now, blasphemy. Why is calling our ancestors a form of blasphemy? Because they are necessary. We couldn't be here without them. And so if our life is precious, then that would give us life that should be considered to be precious. So we have to respect our ancestors, and calling them slaves doesn't do that. In fact, if you look at if you look at any cultures that are African or anybody else, Chinese respect their ancestors, Native Americans respect their ancestors, everybody respects their ancestors. I was at a Thanksgiving dinner one time, and the people said, well, thank Jesus, for the food and all this stuff. And so then they asked me that I wanted to say something. I said, well, yes, we should thank our ancestors as well. Dude looked up at me, man. He says, you thank your ancestors.
Whoa.
Well, I know, man. I'm like, but that's the kind of state of mind that some of us are in.
Yes, sir.
And one of the reasons that we don't have respect for our ancestors is because we believe they were slaves. And I'll tell you, but we are connected to God through our ancestors because from the first man and woman, we could not be here if that connection between us and our ancestors had been broken at any time from the first man and woman to today. So they are very important in our connection to God, the process that created us. And that process is sacred.
Okay, Black Butcher here. We got a few more minutes with Brother LaRue Ned, the author of Why We Shouldn't Call Our Ancestors Slaves, here on 101.3. And give us another quote, brother.
Okay, yeah, but let me say this, that we have the idea that we were freed out of the Emancipation Proclamation because the Europeans, the white man, all of a sudden woke up one day and said, hey, this is wrong. But they knew that slavery was wrong when they first instituted it and called it the necessary evil. And so our ancestors' resistance to slavery is what forced them to come up with the Emancipation Proclamation. And so what they suffered, for us to ignore and not honor our ancestors is a form of blasphemy. Let me read this part. Our ancestors are as sacred as Jesus. Everything that Jesus has done for us, our ancestors have done for us. We know our ancestors existed. We believe that Jesus existed. Surely our ancestors would have avoided slavery if they could have. Was it Jesus' fault that he had to die on the cross? In the King James Version, Matthew 26:39, Jesus prayed to God, asking not to let what was about to happen. Jesus did not want to die, suffer, or die. Was it our ancestors' fault that they had to suffer the cruelest form of captivity in the history of the world? They deserve veneration because of what they had to go through in order for us to be here.
You know, that's serious, brother, and that may rattle a few chains, but that's okay, man, because look, that's what Teju Tuesday is about. This is LaRue Ned, okay, the author of Why We Should Not Call Our Ancestors Slaves. You can get the book by looking up Why We Should Not Call Our Ancestors Slaves, the book on Amazon, .com and
through Facebook.
And Facebook, yeah,
right?
LaRue Ned,
right?
LaRuened.
Get in touch with Teju.
Get in touch with me.
Then I'll sign the copy and mail it to you. I'll put my name on it, give you the autograph.
We'll put it all together. Look here, and I want to thank everybody who listened to Teju Tuesday. We're going to be more like that. I'm going to get Brother LaRue Ned back on the show again, and them 2 hours went real fast. I thank you very much, okay? Our number, 888-5025. Too late to call us right now. You missed it, but hey, this has been a good one. Thank you, Brother Ned. The clock on the wall do be saying that it do be time to go. If y'all want to holler, we'll holler Tuesday some more. Say goodbye, Brother Ned.
And I'll see you later.
Thank you.
You know what I'm saying? Peace.
All right.